One of the questions we get all the time is, how do I give my Jeep more horsepower? The thing is, the Jeep and off-road community is not exactly known for high horsepower, screaming, big, gnarly engines. But what we can do, and what you should do, is re-gear your Jeep to add mechanical advantage that feels like horsepower. That's right, you have found a video all about re-gearing and the best ways for you to do it to make sure that you have optimized your rig for on and off-road experiences. So this video, we're gonna break this down for you to make it make sense for you as to why and how you should go about re-gearing your Jeep. There's a number of key factors you need to consider when you're choosing the right gear ratio for you and ultimately maybe the long-term value of your vehicle. Gearing is basically how the energy produced by the engine is transferred and either added to or detracted from, and then transferred to the wheels and tires. So how do you put the power to the ground? There's some really cool videos out there on the origins of gearing. That's not what this video is intended to be. Just know that it's out there and it's really cool. And if you really nerd out on it like I do, you might enjoy it. But realistically, this video is about picking the right ratio for you. Why would you want to invest in gearing? And I get it. Light bars, color coordinated accents, fun looking seats and seat covers are way more cool and will stand out 10 times better at your local Jeep meet than knowing that you have a good ring and pinion in your axle. But you have to trust me and understand when I say you kind of don't know the benefits of it until you actually do it. Once you've done it, then you realize, wow, I feel like I have horsepower. Wow, when I hook up to this trailer, it actually performs better. When I put it in low range and I crawl off-road, I now have a better torque band than I did just before I did the re-gear. There's so many massive, fantastic benefits to re-gearing, but ultimately, if it's your first time doing it, you kind of just don't know what you don't know. And the light bar looks cool and the seat covers feel good, but the gears get you home. So what are some of the intended uses you may have with your vehicle that gearing would benefit you? Let's say that you have changed the tire wheel size. You know, you put that big lift on and now you're running that big oversized tire. Maybe you've changed the wheel to a bigger, heavier bead lock. You know, there's a number of aspects that your vehicle wasn't designed with originally when the manufacturers created the power output to the mechanical advantage of the gears. How do we go about determining these things? You have to figure out what meets your needs best. You're going to have to be very honest with yourself and say, yes, I'd like to be off-roading constantly, but realistically, I only get off-road once every 4 to 6 weeks. You might choose a more mild gear, which puts you back within the engineered power band or construct of what the vehicle originally came as. So our objective is, as a business and as Jeep enthusiasts, is to guide you to be very honest with yourself, but then to go back to that engineered power band plus some. And that's what I always say, is we go a little bit of plus some. There's a lot of charts out there and there's a lot of conversations, but there are some general rules that we can follow. The higher the number, you're going to be more off-road inspired. The lower number is going to be more of a highway number. Again, picking those numbers is going to be important, but don't get lost in the minutia. Kind of understand those generalities, those general rules for success. Again, if you're towing a trailer, you got to figure out how often are you actually hooked up to that trailer. If you're hooked up pretty frequently because you're a contractor using your Jeep for your day-to-day use and then your weekend camping experience, you might want a deeper gear set. If you have a heavy overlanding trailer that you have the opportunity to pull out, 3-4 times a month, well, then we want to choose a more aggressive gear set, because that's really when you want the peak performance of the vehicle, not necessarily your 9 to 5 Monday through Friday commute. So after intended use, one of the things we're going to consider is the weight of the vehicle. If you're loaded down with lots of armor, skids, winch, steel bumpers, full hardtop, rooftop tent, a lot of non-aerodynamic fixtures, light bars, bull bars, all that kind of stuff off the front of it, you may want to find yourself choosing that numerically higher number set gear than somebody else who has just a simple winch, a stubby bumper, a soft top, 2 seats, and a cooler. That person may not need the same mechanical advantage that you do, despite having the same engine or power plant. All of that is really important because the engine output, regardless of you're a lightweight rig or a heavyweight rig, is going to be very similar. Like I said, people ask me all the time how to get horsepower out of their 3.6 Jeep or their 4.0 or, God forbid, their 2.5. And quite frankly, we just kind of can't do that like you can with a built LS or a built Hemi. We have some pretty finite regulations or expectations. Even our newest Jeeps, we can get maybe 20, 30, maybe 60 horse out of some of our eco diesels, but that's the cap. There's really not a great way to add hundreds of horsepower. So that actual output of energy efficiency is capped. And so therefore we have to consider mechanical advantage to the weight. A heavier vehicle is simply going to have less output power because it is trying to overcompensate for all of that extra weight it's carrying around than the lightweight vehicle. Same output of the engine, different experience for the driver based on weight and shape and aerodynamics of the rig. Now, the load that you're going to be carrying or expecting your vehicle to do is equally important. This crosses over similarly to the weight of your vehicle, but it's a little bit different, and it's worth mentioning because people are actually part of the load. And so if you're regularly going to be wheeling with your family, you may want to take into consideration 2 or 3 or 5 passengers, whatever you're actually driving around. Whereas your drag racer or your rock bouncer, you have a single occupant vehicle. That's simply increased load of the cargo capacity. For our JT Gladiator folks out there, you have that nice big truck bed. Are you gonna fill it up with all of your favorite overlanding and recovery gear because you wanna be like your favorite YouTube influencer and go out there and unstick and unstuck everybody that you think needs help on the trail? Maybe, and kudos if that is you. But that is load capacity. Additionally, with load, you're going to be talking about trailering. And you have to figure out, are you towing around a garden trailer or are you towing around a 3,000 pound off-road camping trailer? That is all the load experience of your vehicle. That will greatly determine whether you need to take a step up or down on that scale of depth for your gear ratio. That gear ratio honestly will make or break your experience off-roading. Now, I'm going to circle back to the you don't know what you don't know. And so arguably, certainly our newest Jeeps can, with that 8-speed transmission, can really soak up some of the inadequacies of bigger tires and heavier loads and a heavier Jeep overall, but it's still not perfect. Realistically, with that 8-speed transmission in your JLs and JTs, first and second is so deep, it kind of just gets you moving. And then ultimately, you never really even see 7th or 8th gear. You pretty much exist in 2 to 6, and at gear search is a little bit between 5, 6, and 7 on the highway if you're lucky. Ultimately, your goal when considering weight and load and intended use is to limit wear and tear and the strain on the engine, transmission, and transfer case, and increase the output efficiency that goes through the axles, through the tires and wheels, and to the ground. Geography. Geography is really important. Folks on the West, you don't have to drive very far to find an off-road trail or experience or some cool place to go and explore. Those of us who are east of the Mississippi or on the East Coast have a greater population density. And while you may love your urban exploration, the reality is sometimes we're driving 3 to 8 to 12 hours to get to an off-road park or off-road event where we're actually going to shift into low range and then get to crawl in an off-road experience. So we may conservatively gear for better highway use to get us there. You're going to want to think about whether or not you are in a mountainous or hilly terrain, whether you're driving across a lot of flatlands. Do you have to drive for 2 or 3 hours to get to your trailhead? Or can you just pull off the beaten path and immediately shift into low range and go have fun? The geography and your intended use is going to largely dictate your chosen gear ratio. For a lot of our customers who are driving from coast to coast regularly for their off-road experiences, you may want to find a sweet spot or a happier spot that is slightly less aggressive than if you just had a dedicated off-road rig. Likewise, if you did have a dedicated off-road rig and you drove onto a trailer and you got to trailer to and fro, go as deep as you possibly can go without jeopardizing the structural strength of the actual ring and pinion. The good general rule to understand is that the higher the gear ratio, again, the deeper that it is, the smaller the pinion head, meaning there's actually less teeth on the pinion itself, and the structural size of the pinion is smaller. The lower, the actual bigger the pinion head, the ring stays pretty similar throughout both, honestly, and that's not really our fail point. It's typically the gear or mesh engagement from pinion to ring, and our pinion is our sweet spot. Again, this is something that JL and JT doesn't have to worry about as much, but it's still something to consider, especially when dealing with a Dana 30 and a 35 in our JLs. Once we hit a 44, we can pretty confidently go to the higher gear ratios of a 513 or 538. And don't worry if you don't know what those numbers are. That's not really what this video is intended to be about, but ultimately know that that's kind of the top end of our spectrum for gearing for our Jeeps. But you can also go a little bit lower and still get a pretty satisfying experience regardless of tire size up to about a 37. Once we crest over into 40s, that's when we're really gonna make sure that we're at our highest gear ratio available. Axles themselves will play a part in choosing that gear ratio. The bigger the actual assembly itself, the more real estate there is available to have a bigger pinion throat and a bigger pinion head. So less to worry about when you're moving to 44s, and then ultimately tons, there's even the least amount to worry about. That's why people do go to those bigger axles. Yes, you can get a ton done on the smaller stock axles. You can do a lot of really cool stuff off-road and on-road, but there are actual material structural differences that encourage choosing gear ratios over others when moving between those different size axle assemblies. So geography is something you're going to consider in that process to say, what size axle do I have? Where am I wheeling it? Am I trailering it? Am I driving it? And what kind of expectation do I have along the way? So folks who are driving through, the flatlands and the prairie lands, you may want to consider a more conservative gear ratio than those folks who are driving through the mountainous regions or ultimately trailering and just, wheeling the snot out of their Jeep and putting it back at the end of the day. They can go pretty aggressive. And it's a bit of a juggling act. Again, intended use, weight, and geography. So now that you've kind of figured out your explicit expectation out of your vehicle and all of the things that I've mentioned, there are a number of charts and calculators that you can kind of get lost in. You can figure out your RPMs at certain speeds and certain gear ratios. These calculators don't typically take into consideration load, weight, and geography, but what they do take into consideration is the engineered aspects of your vehicle, make and model, and therefore the expected output to return from the modification you're about to make. Now, this is where it is going to get a little technical, and I'm going to use some numbers that may or may not sound like gobbledygook at first, but bear with me, and I'm going to try and present it in such a way that keeps it surface level and not too confusing. So again, that 35-inch tire is good with a 456. That puts us into the original engineered power band of that vehicle plus a little mechanical advantage. Now let's say that same person who has the 35 just wants to regear to regain some fuel economy, and really their intended use is commuting. We may suggest a 410 gear ratio. That's one step down from the 456. Or an individual says, I actually pull a trailer pretty frequently with my Jeep on 35s, and that trailer is pretty heavy and my Jeep is pretty heavy. So therefore we may suggest a 488 gear ratio. Ultimately, what we have done as a business and as Jeep enthusiasts have given you three options: a conservative 410 for commuting, the 456, which is an optimized gear plus a little mechanical advantage, or a 488, which is ultimately going to compensate for the weight, load, and geography that you have shared with us. Regardless of where or what you are doing, this general rule actually applies. We base it off of your tire size and engine transmission first and foremost. So we use this combination with each customer in an individualized manner. Pretty much within those gear ratios, we can satisfy the bell curve or the majority of Jeep enthusiasts and how you like to use your Jeep. Now, is there a place for the deepest gears at 538 and some of the numerically lowest gears at 373 and below? Sure there are. If you're absolutely tickled with the way that your vehicle performs on a stock gear set, cool, more power to you. We're glad that you enjoy it and appreciate it. And that's really the benefit or the beauty of the Jeep community. It's yours, it's how you use it, and it's what you like about it. Now, when should you re-gear your vehicle? Now, ultimately, if you want to jump in 2 feet first and build the greatest off-road rig, hey, by all means, do it. Jump right in, and as soon as you put the big tires on, do the gears. But for the rest of us, I really like to encourage people to drive their Jeep in its stock configuration for about as long as possible, pretty much until you can't stand it anymore. There is that kind of creeping sensation of you don't know what you don't know. So if you feel like it's good enough with those 35s, 37s, 40s on your stock gears, you are actually having a depreciated experience. Think about gearing when you go to that bigger tire, when you're struggling off-road to do obstacles that comparable rigs around you are doing, and ultimately when you damage your existing gear set that's in there. Great time to re-gear. Put the bigger tires on and you start to lose fuel economy, great time to re-gear. Want that seat of the pants butt dyno experience where you hit the gas and you want a little oomph and giddy up and go? Great time to re-gear. Your friends are able to kind of creepy crawl through the rock garden and you have to throttle jockey it through the process? Great time to re-gear. You're gonna want to get your budget together, choose a good quality ring and pinion manufacturer. You know, you get what you pay for in life. And so if you're looking to take shortcuts with the actual quality of the components themselves or the installation, it's probably not the right time to regear. Now, once you've made up your mind that regearing your Jeep is the right thing for you, you're gonna want to contact a capable off-road shop to do a professional installation. Can this be done at home? Yeah, sort of. Not really, it shouldn't be. And believe me, I've learned a lot of those hard lessons for you. I did absolutely try going about setting up and doing a gear set many, many years ago. I recognized that I was kind of out of my league, and so I sought to take my parts and pieces to a professional shop and have them do it for me. They wouldn't, because I was using used ring and pinions. No professional shop is going to take your hard-earned dollars and set up used ring and pinions. The reality is you cannot reuse used ring and pinions in a longitudinal manner in an integrity-based professional process. That's just a line in the sand. That's the reality 100% of the situation. A ring and a pinion, the faces harden to each other based on the setup of their home axle. So a new ring and pinion that you receive in a package from a reputable manufacturer will in fact marry to each other once they're installed correctly. Likewise, you can't use cheap knockoff gears in a quality manner. You're always going to be constricted by the quality of the cut, the finish of the metal, and the metallurgy, or what the actual composites are in the metal themselves. Go to the pro shop. They've got the appropriate tools, dial indicators, pinion depth tools, shims, mics, so on and so forth. Lots of fun things that we get to play with on a regular basis to ensure that you have a good experience. Can you be relatively successful? Yeah, every once in a while, a blind squirrel gets a nut. That's true. But the vast majority of people put a ring and pinion in and it grenades in a period of time. There's a lot of little specifications that go into making sure that it not just works for the first 10 miles, but the first 10,000 and 100,000 miles that you may want to use your vehicle for. So now that you've contacted the reputable shop, make sure that you're getting a good quality cut and made gear, and that they're going to do a above board gear setup or installation. Very important for the process. Ultimately, the decision to regear is going to be a personal expectation and decision that you make to benefit you. The Jeep community is beautiful because if you want to have light bars and ducts and superchargers installed and accessorized with your Jeep, cool. If you want to have gnarly 1-ton or better steering and gears and 40s, cool. If you want to have it all, more power to you. The cool thing about the Jeep community is at the end of the day, we're all supposed to gather around the campfire and our favorite beverage and tell lies about the great adventures that we've taken our Jeeps on and the very cool obstacles that we've overcome. Whether or not you regear, that's going to be entirely up to you. There's people who believe that it's absolutely necessary, and then there's going to be people who believe that it's absolutely unnecessary and not needed for what they do. And that's okay. But if you have chosen to regear, think about your intended use, your engine power plant, the weight of your vehicle, the geography that you spend most of your time in and around, and ultimately then how do you protect your investment and make your dollar go the furthest? I hope that this has been an appropriately valuable video for you. I know that I personally am passionate about gears and axles and power to weight ratios, and I get all jazzed up. And I didn't even get into engine swaps and transmission swaps, and what if I want to switch between wheels and tires, and what about drag racing and big monster trucks and pulling trucks? All that kind of stuff actually gets me all jazzed up when it comes to gear specifically. But for this video, hopefully that was a good overview of how gearing affects you and how you can make good choices in the decision-making process of choosing the right gear for you. Now, I really hope that you will make a comment below, because quite frankly, we read and respond to almost 100% of the comments that come in on this channel. Additionally, if you need further clarification or you really could benefit from us selling you a ring and pinion, you can always go over to our website at sfj4x4.com. We actually have a text-only number. It's 440-855-2100, and people text us all the time for DIY questions and, gear and axle related issues. Hope that you enjoy this video and you share it with somebody, and if it's, beneficial enough, maybe we'll make another video and we'll dive deeper into the further minutia of these gears and how they affect our enjoyment on and off road. But, until then, we got a lot of cool Jeeps to build, and so make sure you like and subscribe, ring that bell, and you know what? Look for us in the next Life in Low Range.